Order. The committee, without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. The hearing is entitled Member Day. Got very creative with the title. And without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous material to the chair for inclusion in the record. And I'd like to note that we will have 3 panels of witnesses today to accommodate members. We'll receive testimony from the first panel and conduct Q&A. And then we'll move on to our second panel, receive testimony from them, and so on. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give an opening statement. Good morning. I wanted to welcome all of you to Committee Members' Day for the 118th Congress. Today's hearing is an opportunity for lawmakers across the House, regardless of the committee assignment, to engage with legislation that falls under our jurisdiction here at the Financial Services Committee. We have a nice panel to start off with, one former member of the committee, Mr. Auchincloss, but everybody has an opinion across the wide view of what we do as legislators, and we want to hear from members about their feedback. In today's ever-evolving economic and geopolitical landscape, the challenges that America faces are growing more and more complex. In many instances, these challenges require multidisciplinary solutions to ensure a robust legislative response. With that in mind, we welcome the unique point of view of members from both sides of the aisle. Your work in other fields will help to inform members of this committee when crafting legislation in response to the issues discussed here today. On October 7th, we saw a barbaric and unjustified attack on innocent Israeli civilians perpetrated by Iran-backed terrorist group Hamas. This has prompted members from across the Congress to consider ways in which the United States can prevent Iranian financial aid from reaching its proxies. Another foreign threat is in the form of the Communist Chinese Party, and they've garnered attention from members of Congress. We must work to combat the CCP, which engages in genocide, facilitates the flow of deadly fentanyl into our communities, and seeks to outcompete and ultimately replace American global preeminence. Domestically, we've failed progressive economic policies have threatened the financial security of families across the nation, and driving up the cost of goods and services as Americans race to keep pace amidst stagnating real wages. All of this is against the backdrop of financial regulators who have taken their eyes off the ball. Repeatedly, we've seen Biden appointees overstep their mandates to institute rulemaking that disregard congressional intent and weaken our global competitiveness, instead of focusing on safety and soundness of our financial institutions and our financial system. In conclusion, our nation faces many challenges, and this committee is constantly looking for thoughtful ways to meet the moment. As I've said since I became chairman, my door is always open. Please come to me with any ideas and any feedback. I can't promise we'll always agree, but we'll find common ground wherever we possibly can. And I'm committed to trying to work together on every issue across the board. We welcome the testimony of those appearing before the committee today, and in service of these goals, I thank them for taking the time to be here with us to share their ideas. And with that, I yield back and now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Waters, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to be here with you today, but I am reminded that we're 8 days away from a government shutdown. And so I and my colleagues on this side of the aisle are trying desperately to find a path toward ensuring that the critical federal agencies like HUD and the SEC aren't completed shuttered, and that our hardworking service members and government employees get their paychecks, and that during the crisis in the Middle East, we're able to safeguard our interests and support our allies. Let's start with housing. Today, nearly 600,000 people are experiencing homelessness. Millions more are one crisis away from eviction or foreclosure, all while rent and housing prices continue to skyrocket. This is a crisis with no end in sight. And so this issue, along with many other issues that we're dealing with really have to be addressed in the best way that we possibly can. And so we're here today to hear from our colleagues with not questions but advice and helping us to understand what their concerns are and what they need to do for their districts. And so, you know, as I mentioned housing, I'd like to say that Democrats are certainly taking the housing and homelessness crisis very serious. And as chair, I held 55 hearings on housing. Committee Democrats also worked to pass substantial emergency housing funding during the pandemic. And as ranking member, I have introduced several affordable housing bills, including my Housing Crisis Response Act, which would finally make the investments needed to build 1.4 million homes and help homelessness and revive the dream of home ownership for all. Now, on diversity and inclusion, after assuming the majority, we have lost the Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee that I created. And as we have looked at the way that the budget has been handled by my friends on the opposite side of the aisle, almost every area of government have been stripped of any thought of diversity and inclusion. So I want you to know that's a serious issue that we must deal with. These are just a few of the key issues that have not been addressed. And I look forward to hearing from all of my colleagues today about these and other issues and legislation that deserve to be addressed by this committee. And I yield back.
The ranking member yields back. We'll now recognize our distinguished panel. The Honorable John Rutherford of the state of Florida, the Honorable Derek Kilmer of the state of Washington, the Honorable Jake Auchincloss of the state of Massachusetts. We thank each of you for being here. Each of you will be recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral summary of your presentation. And without objection, your written testimony will be made a part of the record. Mr. Rutherford, we'll begin with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank Ranking Member Waters and the other members of the. Pardon me?
Mr. Rutherford, if we'll reset the time, you've got to pull the mic pretty close to you. The acoustics in here are terrible, and as a member of the Appropriations Committee, I would flag that for your consideration to improve the sound system because it's atrocious. I've long hated it, and thank you for the opportunity to vent a little bit. So, Mr. Rutherford, we'll begin with you again, but please be sensitive to the terrible microphone.
Okay, there we go. Did you do that? Thank you again for this opportunity to speak on my bill, H.R. 3170, the bipartisan bicameral Homes for Every Local Protector, Educator, and Responder, also known as the HELPER Act. I can tell you high home prices and now high interest rates have made home ownership almost out of reach for many of our first responders and teachers around the country. The HELPER Act would address this by creating a one-time use for home loan program through FHA for law enforcement officers, firefighters, EMTs, paramedics, and pre-K through 12 teachers who are first-time home buyers only. Modeled after the successful VA home loan program, this bill would remove some of the steepest financial obstacles that these public servants face when trying to purchase a home, such as the large down payment and the monthly mortgage insurance premium. The HELPER Act also includes an upfront mortgage insurance premium to ensure the solvency of this program and a 5-year sunset so that the program can thoroughly be evaluated. Not only would the HELPER Act help these public servants live in the communities where they serve, it would create a much-needed recruitment and retention tool. I can tell you since the riots of 2020, retirements are up, recruiting is down. In the field of law enforcement, that is a recipe for disaster. And as a former sheriff, I understand how important it is for law enforcement officers to live in the communities that they protect. And when our officers become part of the community that they serve, morale goes up, safety improves, and bonds between the community and the police are enhanced. The HELPER Act has received the support of numerous organizations, and I'll read just a few: the Fraternal Order of Police, major county sheriffs, major city chiefs, International Association of Firefighters, International Association of EMTs and Paramedics, the American Federation of Teachers, National Association of Federally Insured Credit Unions, the National Association of Realtors. Additionally, the HELPER Act has been endorsed by more than 130 elected officials around the country, including 14 mayors just from the state of North Carolina. So the HELPER Act has 97 bipartisan co-sponsors in the House, 13 in the Senate, where it is led by Senators Rubio, Ossoff, and Brown. And I'd like to extend a special thanks to the 10 bipartisan members of this committee who have also co-sponsored the bill already. I really do appreciate that, and includes Representative Watson Coleman, who is my primary co-lead on this. On behalf of the thousands of first responders and teachers across this nation, I humbly ask for this committee's full and fair consideration of the HELPER Act. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll now recognize Mr. Kilmer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman McHenry and Ranking Member Waters, for holding this hearing. Today I'm here to bring 2 housing bills to your attention as we find ourselves in the midst of a housing affordability crisis. Recent research underscores the urgency of the situation. Residential construction fell 7.3 million units short between 2000 and 2015. Research from Up for Growth, an organization committed to solving the housing shortage and affordability crisis through evidence-based policy, identified housing costs as the leading factor contributing to the rise in household budgets over the past 15 years. There's not a single state, there's not a single congressional district with enough housing supply to meet demand. And that reality pushes dreams of home ownership out of reach for far too many Americans, and we've got to fix it. Addressing the nation's housing crisis is a complex challenge, but experts agree that restrictive zoning and land use policies are part of the problem. And as a result, Representative Flood and I introduced the bipartisan, bicameral Yes in My Backyard, or YIMBY Act, which has been referred to your committee. The YIMBY Act ensures community development block grant program recipients report on policies that may affect housing affordability. Specifically, the bill would require recipients of CDBG funding to track and report on the implementation of certain land use policies that promote housing production, such as enacting high-density, single-family, and multifamily zoning, addressing height limitations, and encouraging and reducing minimum lot size. Recognizing that CDBG funds are critical for localities, the bill seeks to encourage local governments and CDBG practitioners to work together to address severe housing underproduction and to improve the lives of families and individuals who are negatively impacted by a lack of affordable housing. We count many of your committee members among our bipartisan co-sponsors. Dozens of groups from across the political spectrum are with us on this bill too, from Americans for Prosperity to the National Apartment Association to the National Association of Realtors and the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and more. This bill passed under suspension in the 116th Congress, and we want to work with you to see it over the finish line in this Congress. The second bill I want to bring to your attention is called the VALID Act. It too is bipartisan and bicameral, and it focuses on housing affordability, specifically for our nation's veterans. My district is home to a large number of active duty service members and veterans, and we all know that our nation is stronger and our world is safer as we approach Veterans Day because of their service and their sacrifice. One important way we can honor their sacrifice is by ensuring those who served can achieve their dream of one day owning a home. VA home loans can offer veterans, active duty service members, reservists, and National Guard members advantages over other loan options, including lower down payments, more favorable interest rates, and low closing costs, often saving tens of thousands of dollars over the life of the loan. Despite these benefits, overall usage of VA home loans is surprisingly low, with only 10 to 15% of veterans annually reported as using the benefit. providing a simple update to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's already existing Informed Consumer Choice Disclosure Notice will help close that loop and ensure veterans and service members are aware of their hard-earned VA loan benefit. Specifically, the bill will add VA home loans to the current disclosure form that lenders must provide to prospective home buyers, which right now only compares conventional and FHA loan options. Like the YIMBY Act, several members of your committee have co-sponsored the bill, and it's supported by stakeholder organizations including the Veterans Association of Real Estate Professionals, Veterans United Home Loans, the Military Officers Association of America, the National Association of Realtors, and Veterans of Foreign Wars. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for your time and your leadership on these issues. I look forward to working with you, hopefully to move these critical pieces of legislation forward. And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gilmer. And we'll now recognize you, Mr. Aquaclaus, for 5 minutes.
I appreciate Chair McHenry and Ranking Member Waters for holding a Member Day hearing in the Financial Services Committee. I would like to take this opportunity to talk about two of the bills I've introduced this Congress over which the Financial Services Committee has jurisdiction, the Power of the Mint Act and the Promoting New and Diverse Depository Institutions Act. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution states that Congress has the power to, quote, coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. This constitutional mandate extends to authorizing both retail and wholesale central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. While the Federal Reserve has recognized that it lacks the authority to issue a CBDC without congressional authorization, the Department of Justice has so far refused to issue a legal opinion to that effect. It is therefore imperative that Congress assert our constitutional prerogative. The U.S. dollar has been the world's reserve currency since the end of World War II. The rule of law is critical for the United States dollar to continue in this status. Issuing a CBDC without congressional assent would undermine the rule of law, and thus the United States' geoeconomic standing, more than any purported and unproven benefits of a CBDC would enhance it. The Power of the Mint Act does not prohibit the Federal Reserve or the Department of Treasury from conducting research and development or being involved in international consultations on standard setting regarding CBDCs. It simply asserts Congress's constitutional duty to authorize the minting of money. Representative Hill has been a capable co-lead and partner on this bill. I'm grateful for his collaboration, and I hope to work with the committee to move this bill forward. Our economy has not always worked for all communities equally, as is evident in the glaring wealth disparities across the country. One way to address inequities is to ensure Americans have access to diverse and affordable financial services that can help them save money and help small businesses raise capital. I introduced the Promoting New and Diverse Depository Institutions Act to move our financial system closer to economic equality. This bipartisan bill requires that the prudential regulators come up with a strategic plan to help reduce the barriers that the new depository institutions face when applying for a bank charter. This bill specifically calls for the strategic plan to take into consideration the challenges faced by de novo financial institutions, including minority depository institutions, MDIs, and community development financial institutions, CDFIs. Consumers should have access to affordable banking services, which requires competition in the market. Over the last several decades, there has been consolidation among banks and credit unions. This has effectively limited the products available to consumers and artificially driven up costs, while closing banking branches for people who already did not have many choices. My bill will help new banks, and in doing so, it will expand access to affordable services for unbanked communities. Starting and maintaining a new bank or credit union is a difficult process. According to the Federal Reserve, only 7 new banks were formed between 2009 and 2013. Based on the decreasing number of new banks, Congress must act to direct banking regulators to measure and mitigate the challenges new banks face. This study will inform future steps that Congress can take to expand competition and access for consumers. I'm pleased to have Chair McHenry as a co-sponsor of this bill. The bill passed the House last Congress twice. There's a bipartisan Senate companion, and so I asked this committee to expeditiously move this bill so that we can help unbanked communities and expand banking access to our constituents. And finally, I want to call this committee's continued attention and to add my emphasis to the need to expand the low-income housing tax credit program. This has been a bipartisan success over the last decades. In my home state of Massachusetts, the lack of affordable housing is the single biggest problem that we face. It is suffocating the ability for our economy to reach its full potential. It is preventing young families from gaining a foothold, and it is causing panic amongst our senior population. The Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act would expand the LIHTC program in a measured and thoughtful way, and I would encourage legislators of this committee to give it serious consideration. I thank the chair and ranking member for the opportunity to testify and respectfully urge the committee to support and advance the power of the Mint Act and the Promoting New and Diverse Depository Institutions Act. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to thank this bipartisan panel for all proposing bipartisan solutions. It's a welcome acknowledgement of the situation we find ourselves in divided government, which means we have to work together to achieve legislative results, but particularly with policy. To have enduring policy, we have to have policy that meets some metrics for both parties and has a wide cross-section of Congress that can support those initiatives. So I want to thank each of you for bringing proposals that are squarely within the Financial Services Committee jurisdiction and things we should address. And housing affordability is clearly one, and that's a running theme from all three of the members testifying today. And I want to thank you for that emphasis and focus. Mr. Auchincloss, I want to thank you for your work on de novo institutions. It's a work of financial inclusion that is much needed, whether it's Massachusetts or North Carolina or wherever you may be in the United States. And so thank you for your leadership there. And with that, I yield back and now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to thank all of our witnesses, our colleagues that are here this morning, indicating what they care about and the kind of work that they're doing. I'm very appreciative for that. But Mr. Rutherford, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your bill, the HEPR Act. As I understand it, it would provide mortgage assistance to firefighters, police officers, and teachers. I appreciate the effort to expand access to affordable home ownership, and I certainly appreciate the public service of people who take on these professions. They deserve a chance at the American dream of home ownership. But Mr. Rutherford, I don't believe that people in these specific professions are the only ones who deserve that chance. I believe, for example, nurses, first responders, child care workers, elder care professionals, construction workers, social workers, and any other person who works hard every day to achieve their dream of home ownership deserves that balance. So, data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics shows that the individuals assisted by your bill are in occupations that are overwhelmingly more white, more male than the overall national workforce. For example, 85.5% of firefighters are white and nearly 94% are male. That's not representative of America, let alone the workforce. When the U.S. first created a federal program to help expand access to home ownership through low down payment mortgages, the government actively discriminated against people of color, helping to create red line neighborhoods and segregated living patterns that are still visible in many communities today. These policies help create the racial, wealth, and home ownership gaps. The black home ownership rate today sits at 42.7% compared to 47.8% for Latinx households and 73.4% for white households. This is the largest black-white home ownership gap since 1890, with the Latinx white home ownership gap not far behind at more than 25 percentage points. Mr. Rutherford, can you please explain why you chose these specific professions and whether you would be open to expanding the people who qualify for mortgage assistance under your bill? Under the Republican budget, 30% has been cut from housing. Can you add some more people to your bill?
I thank the ranking woman for the question. You know, one of the things that we focused on in this group was those who actually serve their community, and as a result of that, as I mentioned, need to live in the community that they actually serve. And in fact, one of the demographics that you were talking to, I was a sheriff for 12 years in Jacksonville. One of the things that I always wanted to achieve was my agency to represent the community that I was protecting. And it was programs like this that would allow me to do that, because those same individuals that need that assistance to buy their first home and remain in the community are some of our most challenged populations. And so I would propose to you that this program will actually help in minority recruitment by keeping people in the community that they serve and making it available for those individuals. This was not drafted as a demographic effort, though, I will tell you up front. But I can tell you this, it was based on their service. Recruitment in every community is down significantly. Retirements are up significantly. Already this year, we've had a 22% increase in the number of police officers that are shot. And not just shot. This is the part that concerns me the most. We've lost 109 officers in 92 ambush-style attacks already this year. That is, they're being targeted. And so this is just one way for us to really help make the agencies, whether it's, and not just police officers, but also firefighters and others, make them look like the community that they protect. This program will actually help that. I yield back.
Jolie's time's expired. Do any other members seek recognition? If not, we'd like to thank the panel for coming to appear before the committee, and awkward to tell my colleagues you're dismissed, but you're dismissed. We'll now move to the second panel. So we'll take a pause here while the panel resets. Thank you all. Thanks. If we could, if the witnesses can accommodate one more panelist. We're trying to accommodate everyone as best we can before votes. Well, today we welcome the testimony of a number of our committee members and one off-committee member who was originally going to be on the first panel. Please don't try to embarrass him of your knowledge about the jurisdiction. We're not trying to show each other. I'm joking, or at least attempting to joke on this Thursday morning. We'll now recognize the Honorable Al Green from the state of Texas, the Honorable Emmanuel Cleaver from the state of Missouri, the Honorable Joyce Beatty from the state of Ohio, the Honorable Sylvia Garcia from the state of Texas, the Honorable Doug Lamborn from the state of Colorado, the Honorable Brittany Pedersen from the state of Colorado. We thank each of you for your time to be here. Each of you will be recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your remarks. You all well know the terrible acoustics of these microphones, so I appreciate you all being put through the pain that we put our panelists through and our witnesses through. So with that, we'll recognize you for 5 minutes. We'll begin with you, Mr. Green.
Thank you very much to the ranking member and the Speaker pro tempore. I greatly appreciate this opportunity to speak. And still I rise and to speak on H.R. 1244, the original legislation awarding a historic Congressional Gold Medal collectively to Africans and their descendants enslaved within our country from August 20th of 1619 to December 6, 1865. Also, H.R. 5490, Reforming Disaster Recovery Act. H.R. 5223, the original Open for Business Act of 2023. H.R. 4204, the Shielding Community Banks from Systemic Risk Assessments Act. H.R. 4116, the Systemic Risk Authority Transparency Act. H.R. 2465, the Financial Compensation for CFPB Whistleblowers Act. H.R. 166, the Fair Lending for All Act. And finally, I'll make comments on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. H.R. 1244 would award a Congressional Gold Medal to the foundational mothers and fathers of this country. In 1956, the Congress of the United States of America, in its infinite wisdom, accorded a Congressional Gold Medal to Confederate soldiers. I think it's time for us to recognize the economic foundational mothers and fathers of the country whose lives were sacrificed to make America great. H.R. 5490 would codify into law the fundamental requirements and the objectives of the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program. It would ensure timely and efficient distribution of relief funds. H.R. 5223 would mandate in-person branch bank offices to remain open until 7 p.m. 1 day a week and for 4 hours on Saturdays. H.R. 4204 would exempt community banks from any special assessment of the Federal Depository Institution, and it would also do so as a result of some of the incidents that we're all well aware of. H.R. 4116 would require financial regulators to issue a report following the use of the Systemic Risk Authority. H.R. 2465 would require the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to provide awards to whistleblowers who come forward with evidence of wrongdoing. And H.R. 166 would create an Office of Fair Lending Testing within the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to expose invidious discrimination and hold predatory financial institutions and individuals accountable. Finally, moving to the Consumer Protection Bureau. Dear friends, the CFPB's success can be measured, and the numbers speak for themselves. The CFPB is one of the most effective and popular agencies within our government. 4 out of 5 Americans, including 77% of Republicans, support the CFPB. The CFPB has obtained $19 billion for consumers in the form of relief, and this is for 195 million people. 4 million consumer complaints have been filed with the CFPB, and 98% of those have received a timely response from their financial company. If we did not have the CFPB, we would surely want to create it. Our desire would be there, but sadly, I'm not sure that it could be accomplished at this time. So I invite all to please, let's do what we can to protect the CFPB. Finally, returning to the Congressional Gold Medal for the enslaved people. 240 plus years of lives sacrificed would merit some consideration from this Congress. It is my belief that these economic foundational mothers and fathers are the persons who can be said to have laid the foundation that we all happen to stand upon today when it comes to the economy, the economic order, the stability of this country. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to secure the 290 votes, 2/3 needed, and that we'll be able to present something to this committee so that we may present to the economic foundational mothers and fathers whose lives were sacrificed over 240 years to make America great, to present them with a Congressional Gold Medal. I thank you for the time, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'll now recognize Mr. Cleaver for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you and to the ranking member for presenting us with this opportunity to share our view on things that we would like to bring before the committee or that we have. As you know, I represent Missouri's 5th Congressional District, which includes Kansas City, Missouri, which is the state's largest municipality. I also serve as the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Housing and Insurance. It shouldn't be news to anyone that we are in a housing crisis. Demand for housing is far outpacing supply. As a result, millions of Americans in urban, suburban, and rural neighborhoods are finding shelter to be increasingly unaffordable. Prospective home buyers are facing record high home prices, and millions of renters are cost burdened and spending soaring amounts of their income on housing. Public housing project-based Section 8 rental and the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher programs remain critical tools to support renters with the lowest income and reduce housing instability. Cuts to these programs, or so many others, would exacerbate affordable housing challenges for low-income families throughout the nation. I have a number of bills that address this nation's affordable housing crisis, as does our ranking member, Maxine Waters. I'd like to highlight 2. The first piece of legislation is the Choice in Affordable Housing Act. HUD's Housing Choice Voucher Program is the federal government's major program for supporting affordable, safe, and sanitary housing for the elderly, the disabled, and very low-income families in the private market. The success of the program depends on the participation of private market housing owners, but landlord participation has markedly decreased since 2009. At times, we've seen in excess of 10,000 landlords exiting the program annually. My bill, co-led by Congresswoman Chavez de Rima, would remove bureaucratic barriers and incentivize greater landlord participation. This bill has significant agreement and support from both industry and advocates. The second piece of legislation is the Strategy and Investment in Rural Housing Preservation Act. We are now in the discussion phase. The U.S. Department of Agriculture supports investments in affordable rural housing by providing Section 515 and 514 direct loans to developers to build or rehabilitate rental housing for low-income families. When these loans mature, property owners are no longer required to offer affordable units, and tenants are no longer eligible for USDA's rental assistance. Combined with the lack of new investments, the looming wave of maturing loans threatens the stability of hundreds and thousands of families. These families have an average household income of $13,000, and a large percentage of these families have members that are elderly or disabled, meaning this assistance is vital to them staying in their homes. My legislation would require the USDA to implement a program for the preservation and revitalization of such housing projects financed with USDA loans. This legislation has previously passed through this committee on a bipartisan basis. I've also included additional legislation with this statement. The Good Deed Act, which directs the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, is something that is very serious, and I appreciate working with Congresswoman Nikema Williams. As many of you know, people are stealing people's homes just about every hour of the day, and many of them won't even report it because they're embarrassed. This program will also be providing a statement to all of you so that we can continue to discuss this issue. It is my hope that this committee prioritizes advancing serious bipartisan legislation addressing the affordable housing crisis in this Congress. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Mr. Cleaver. Now, Ms. Beatty. Ms. Beatty is recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chair McHenry and Ranking Member Waters. Thank you for hosting this Members' Day hearing. I am testifying today about the importance of diversity and inclusion in our financial system and the need for this matter to be seriously considered by the committee. As you know, 2 Congresses ago, then Chairwoman Maxine Waters made history by establishing the first ever subcommittee on diversity and inclusion. I had the honor to serve as the first ever chair, and my good friend, Congresswoman Ann Wagner, served as the first ever ranking member. For the first time, Congress conducted oversight of D&I in the financial industry and held firms accountable for their D&I practices. No surprise, we discovered rampant disparity. We received data from 44 of the largest banks with more than $50 billion in assets, and 31 of the largest investment firms with more than $400 billion in assets, and the 27 largest insurance company direct premiums of more than $7 billion. The data we collected revealed a staggering lack of workforce and supplier diversity across the industry. On an average, less than 20% of executive leaders at the largest banks were people of color. Women comprise less than 1/3 of corporate boards at the largest investment firms. On average, insurance companies spent less than 3% on diversity suppliers. We also uncovered the stark inequality prevalent in asset management. Of the $82 trillion in assets under management, only 1.4% are managed by minority or women-owned firms. Overall, we found that women and minority-owned businesses face clear barriers to market industry, limited access to capital, and persistent discrimination. Through public hearings and published reports, the D&I subcommittee pushed the industry to do more, and we actually moved the needle towards this progress. You have heard today from members on all panels that they have introduced bills on D&I, including my 2 bills on H.R. 2123 and H.R. 779.5. I would like to enter into the records quotes made by my Republican colleagues acknowledging the importance of D&I. Despite our gains, we realize that our work is not done. I was extremely disappointed, Mr. Chairman, when the chair chose to eliminate the D&I subcommittee this Congress. On February 1st, 2023, at this committee's organizational meeting, Chair McHenry said on the record that diversity and inclusion policies would be under the jurisdiction of every subcommittee. At the same meeting, Congresswoman Wagner said she wanted to work together to make sure the issue is addressed. Despite these promises, nearly a full year into this Congress, we have held 55 hearings and not one dedicated to D&I. To this day, the jurisdiction has blatantly ignored this problem. Economic inequality continues to pervade this country. Women still earn only 83 cents for every dollar earned by a man. minorities, and especially Black Americans consistently experience higher rates of unemployment and poverty compared to white people. Many groups continue to face high barriers for participation in our financial system. To make matters worse, D&I practices are under attack. Virtually every Republican-led FY24 appropriations bill prohibits funds from being used to promote diversity and inclusion initiatives. We are seeing what appears to be a coordinated strategy to systematically undo each and every gain achieved over recent years. Whether it is on college campuses, universities, or at corporations, or government agencies like SBA and minority business development agencies, D&I is definitely under attack. We have the data, we have the need, and we've moved the needle. Mr. Chair, I come here today to ask that this committee holds hearings dedicated to D&I. Thank you for your time, and I yield back.
Chair yields back. We'll now recognize Ms. Garcia for 5 minutes. We'll pause the time, reset the time, Ms. Garcia.
Partisan effort now.
Yes,
Thank you.
we need electronic voting in committee. I know
It says
Ms.
Green Bay.
Waters started that process pre-COVID. We need to make that happen, and we need to get microphones so we all can just basically hear. So I'm
right.
sorry, Ms. Garcia.
It's all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Waters, for hosting this Member Day. As I've mentioned many times before in this committee, I represent a district that is 77% Latino and over 90% people of color. My district, like our great nation, is racially, ethnically, and linguistically diverse. I urge the committee's immediate consideration and support for my bills, the Community Financial Language Inclusion Act, H.R. 2834, and the Multilingual Financial Literacy Act, H.R. 2835. H.R. 2834 would allow the Community Development Financial Institution Fund to provide resources and outreach materials in additional language other than English. This act would direct the Financial Literacy Education Commission to study the impact of language barriers on financial health. The bill would also require the commission to promote efforts of federal agencies to make financial literacy resources available in at least 8 of the most spoken languages in the United States. Combined, these bills would support over 65 million people nationwide who speak a language other than English at home, and more than 26 million individuals who have limited English proficiency. This is one of the many ways Congress can act to improve the economic status of diverse communities, like many of my district. Ensuring everyone in the United States can thrive financially is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do for a country which has about 380 spoken languages. I also encourage this committee to consider Representative Payne's bipartisan Payment Choice Act. The Payment Choice Act would guarantee that every consumer has a choice to pay for goods and services in cash. As I've always said, cash is king. Cash is simple and common. This is not a partisan issue. It is an American issue to protect American currency, and I encourage all members to support Mr. Payne's bill and that we consider this bill in committee. Furthermore, as the first Hispanic member of the Houston Congressional Delegation and one of the first 2 Latinas to represent Texas, I urge the committee to focus on making sure that we have diverse witnesses. Ms. Beatty has already mentioned diversity and inclusion as a topic. I would urge this committee to consider diversity and inclusion beginning with our committee witnesses. Diversity among the witnesses presented before the committee is critical to better representation and safeguards against implicit bias and artificial barriers. Finally, as co-chair of the Congressional Homelessness Caucus, I would like to draw our attention committee again to the nation's housing crisis. As many of our colleagues have said before me, soaring housing prices are a critical impact to the shortage of housing across America. Housing units are impacting, the lack of housing units are impacting the most vulnerable, lowest income individuals, leading to more homelessness. In 2022, a total of 582,462 individuals experienced homelessness on any given night, and homelessness has been on the rise since 2017, experiencing an overall increase of 6%. It is November, and this committee has yet to hold one hearing on affordable housing. As mentioned by Ms. Beatty, we have had 55. We must do more, and we must do better. Allowing Americans to live in the streets is not a standard that our nation should be willing to accept. It's un-American, and it's un-Christian, and it's certainly unacceptable. Once again, I urge consideration of all these topics, these bills, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have today. Thank you, and I yield back.
The lady yields back. We'll now recognize Mr. Lamborn of Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for having this hearing day and yielding me time to discuss a timely and important bill which was referred to this committee. I'm here to talk about the bipartisan Taylor Force Martyr Payment Prevention Act. Taylor Force was a U.S. Army artillery officer, West Point graduate, and Vanderbilt University graduate student, and he served 2 tours in Afghanistan when he was killed by a Hamas-affiliated terrorist in 2016. The terrorist killed Mr. Force and wounded 10 other civilians before being fatally shot by Israeli police. Following the attack, the Palestinian Authority made a martyr payment to the family of the terrorist. The Palestinian Authority maintains a Martyrs Fund, which pays out $300 million annually in monetary rewards to the families of killed or incarcerated terrorists. The payments go up when more Jews are killed in the attack. Numerous Palestinian and Middle Eastern banks facilitate or support martyr payments, perpetuating the system which incentivizes attacks on U.S. and Israeli citizens. To counter these pay-to-slay programs, in 2018, I introduced the bipartisan Taylor Force Act, which was signed into law by President Trump. The Taylor Force Act aimed to eliminate the martyr payment system and force the Palestinian Authority to stop incentivizing the killing of Americans and Israelis. My bill severely restricted the ability of the Palestinian Authority to access U.S. non-humanitarian aid. Regrettably, the martyr payment system has continued, due in large part to Middle Eastern financial institutions refusing to block these transactions. These banks, often in nominally friendly jurisdictions, purposefully evade U.S. anti-terror sanctions and continue to knowingly provide banking services to Hamas and others. These services are often in U.S. dollar-denominated transactions for terrorist organizations that intentionally target Americans. Such financial conduct is only possible through the use of correspondent accounts within U.S. banks. It is because of this that I introduced the bipartisan Taylor Force Martyr Payment Prevention Act, which is before the committee. The bill would expand the institutional factors the Department of the Treasury must consider when determining if a foreign financial institution is of primary money laundering concern, and subject them to the prohibition of maintaining and opening accounts in U.S. financial institutions. Financial institutions are not permitted to knowingly provide services to Hamas, and this bill would make it harder to skirt the anti-terrorism laws which prevent banks from working with Hamas to move money to terrorists and their families. Blocking terrorists from accessing financial tools has always been an important issue, but recent atrocities carried out by Hamas against Israel in their recent invasion on October 7th have brought the need for my bill back into the spotlight. Congress must act to stop the flow of funding to Hamas. We must act to drive Hamas out of the banking system completely. Mr. Chairman and other members of this committee, it is clear that stopping martyr payments is as important to you as it is to me. I want to thank your committee staff who have cooperated with my office as we've worked to move this bill, and get feedback from stakeholders, such as the Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. We'll now recognize Ms. Patterson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Waters, for allowing me this opportunity to speak to our committee and highlight some of the areas that I hope that we're able to work on together. I want to thank you both for running a professional committee where we actually come together to find common ground and work on policies that will positively impact the American people. I'm here to talk about an issue that continues to be greatly impactful in Colorado to our economy and our small businesses. It's the SAFE Banking Act. You all know that this is a bipartisan piece of legislation that was spearheaded by my predecessor and friend, Congressman Ed Perlmutter, as he previously passed the House of Representatives 7 times since 2019, this piece of legislation. 11 years ago, Colorado became the first state to legalize marijuana, and as the cannabis industry took off, these businesses ran into significant challenges in accessing basic and critical banking services. Because of existing law related to marijuana and cannabis, many financial institutions were unable to provide banking and financial services to these cannabis-based businesses. Even worse, concerns about federal regulations tie up more than just marijuana growers and retailers. Instead, suppliers, vendors, landlords, and employees who have been even indirectly tied to the cannabis industry see their access to banking sector at risk. So this poses numerous concerns for our community. It puts people in an unsafe position when they're utilizing cash instead of using the banking services. I hope that this committee is once again going to take up this very important piece of legislation. Another thing that is a big priority for me, and I know that we have already done a lot of work on this issue, is addressing the fentanyl crisis. One of the pieces that we still have yet to work together on, and I look forward to the opportunity, is looking at how our social media companies are playing a role in disseminating, unfortunately, selling fentanyl. This is impacting our young people at a very high rate, and it is past time that social media companies actually have to come to the table and be held accountable for the use of their platforms in illicit trafficking. Housing and insurance, I also want to highlight key areas that I think we have the opportunity to focus on. We all talk often about the housing crisis. We have a limited supply and we need to all work together. It's an all hands on deck moment to ensure that everybody across our communities has the opportunity to provide shelter, a roof over their head for themselves and their families. Colorado has been impacted this at a very high rate. We have many people who have been moving to Colorado for the last 10 years. And it significantly increased during the pandemic, especially for places in rural Colorado and in my community. People have seen their housing, the cost of housing increase threefold in just a couple of years and are getting pushed out in the communities that they lived their entire lives. So I look forward to working with this committee to provide the financial incentives needed for developers to build the types of attainable housing that our communities desperately need. I also encourage our committee to look at and explore legislation modernizing the FHA loan limits, exploring impact of restrictionary zoning practices that are having on our housing prices, and ensuring that federal grant programs through HUD, FHFA, and FHA work with rural mountain communities like the ones in my community. Another big barrier that we're facing in Colorado, and this is happening across the country, is the inability to actually insure your home because of wildfire risk. I think that we can look at what has worked well with the flood insurance program, what lessons we can learn from, and look at what options we can provide for people across the United States to make sure that if you are at risk of a wildfire, you still have options to buy your home and insure your home. In my remaining time, I want to focus on the risks that artificial intelligence in the banking sector. Financial institutions are already utilizing artificial intelligence to identify fraud and protect consumers, so this is the benefit. However, the risk of deep fakes potentially threatens the safety and security of consumer accounts. This is why I introduced the Preventing Deepfake Scams Act with my friend and member of his committee, Congressman Mike Flood. This bill will establish a task force to examine AI in the financial services sector, including both the potential benefits of the technology for financial institutions and the unique risks it poses to customer account security. I look forward to working with all of you on these critical issues and really appreciate the time. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I want to thank the panel. We have votes on the floor. I don't know if the ranking member wishes to say anything, but I'll yield back. And if we're good to go, I want to thank the we're good to go. I want to thank the panel for your presentation and your feedback and your participation. Thanks so much.
Mr. Chairman,
We'll now
Also
recess.
very much. Yes.
can I submit my revised remarks for the record?
Yes, without objection, the gentlelady will be, her revised remarks will be submitted for the record. We will now recess till after votes. We'll have our third and final panel of the day. Thanks so much.
Thank you all very much.
It's working now. Or is it?
Committee will come to order. Welcome back. Today's third panel, we'll hear testimony from a number of our committee members. We'll hear from the Honorable Vicente Gonzalez of the state of Texas, the Honorable Nikema Williams of the state of Georgia, Honorable Brad Sherman of the state of California, and the Honorable Rashida Tlaib of the state of Michigan. We thank each of you for your time. You'll be recognized for 5 minutes to go to oral presentation of your remarks, and without objection, your written statements will be part of the record. We'll begin with you, Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chairman McHenry and Ranking Member Waters. Thank you for hosting today's Members' Day hearing. As a member on this committee, I'm proud of the work we're doing to expand access to capital, protect American consumers, and strengthen our economy. For background, my district encompasses much of South Texas, from McAllen on the border to Brownsville, where the border meets the sea, and up the coast to Kingsville, Texas, home of the King Ranch and Naval Air Station Kingsville. My constituency is a predominantly underserved, low to middle class income community. We also have over 21,000 veterans located in my district, with military installations in my district and further north in Corpus Christi and San Antonio. Our region is large and vast. It's Texas, bigger than most places. We are also growing rapidly, and our local economy is booming. For reference, our population is projected to double by 2045. But to accommodate a growing population, we must foster an environment that creates stability, wealth, and growth. Starting a small business is expensive and risky. 50% of small businesses fail within the first 5 years. But it's also the lifeblood of burgeoning communities like mine. While some entrepreneurs use personal savings to open a business, that's not an option for everyone, including many veterans. According to the Institute of Veteran Military Families, 75% of reporting veterans have trouble accessing capital to start or grow a small business. A business loan provides the upfront capital needed to open doors, pay staff, and provide a buffer until the business starts turning a profit. Credit unions are one of the institutions that provide loans to small businesses and supporting them from the beginning of their venture to its end. Currently, credit unions are constrained to only lending 12.25% of their assets to small businesses, severely limiting who can access this vital financial service. For a community on the rise, like mine, the arbitrary cap on member business loans stunts economic growth. This is happening across the country, which is why I introduced H.R. 4867, the Veteran Member Business Loan Act, with Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick. This bipartisan bill would exempt loans made to veteran-owned businesses from the member business lending cap imposed on credit unions. Our service member provides tremendous value to our society, both while in service and as civilians. I think both parties can agree that we need to support our veterans as they transition back to civilian life. For many, at least 25%, that means starting a small business. We made a promise to support our service members after they put their lives on the line to protect the freedoms we cherish, and we should do just that. Our veterans deserve every chance to contribute to their community, and that means accessing capital to start a small business. I urge this committee to mark up this important legislation and support our veterans as they build a better life after service. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. We'll now go to you, Ms. Williams, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman McHenry and Ranking Member Waters, for having this opportunity to offer testimony before our committee today. As our committee considers legislative priorities for this Congress, I would like to highlight a priority that not only deeply impacts my constituents in Georgia's 5th District, but also many other families around the country. As a member of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee, I know that we've not adequately addressed ongoing housing issues related to title theft and air property. People are walking into county offices around the country and forging deeds all over the country, and it's not even a felony. This kind of fraud is called title theft. Criminals are purposefully targeting seniors, immigrants, and marginalized individuals who lack the financial means to get their homes back through expensive and time-consuming court proceedings. We can't continue to allow something as precious and hard-earned as someone's home go unprotected. For most people, Their home is the biggest investment that they'll make in their entire life. It's an opportunity to build generational wealth that can benefit their children, grandchildren, and generations to come, working to close the racial wealth gap in this country. People work hard for their homes, but there have been numerous instances where people are thrown out of their homes at a moment's notice due to title theft. One of my constituents arrived home in November of 2021 to find a bulldozer in her front yard, tearing down her home. Her house was paid off, but a stranger who had forged a deed and stolen her home decided to bulldoze it. And I have the article from Atlanta's WSB-TV that I'd like to submit for the record. But this is why I'm co-leading Ranking Member Cleaver's Good Deed Act that addresses title theft by establishing a $10 million annual grant program administered by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to fund applications that assist in the prevention, detection, investigation, and prosecution of deed fraud. Mandating that states receive funding, amend state laws to require identifiable information of individuals notarizing and filing deeds. Requiring HUD to report to Congress on activities funded under the grant program and to identify best practices in reducing deed fraud. Directing the U.S. Sentencing Commission to promulgate guidelines or amend existing guidelines for offenses involving deed fraud, and requiring the Federal Bureau of Investigation to add a category for deed fraud to the Uniform Crime Reporting Program. The Good Deed Act will support preventative measures to stop devastating land loss from American families, provide better tools for the investigation and prosecution of those engaged in such crimes, and support victims in restoring homes to the rightful owners. And another housing issue that disproportionately impacts minority communities has to do with heir property and tangled titles. Property becomes heir property and titles become tangled when family homes or land is passed from generation to generation through inheritance, usually without a will or a formal estate strategy. One study found that people of color were less than half as likely as their white peers to have a will. This tendency is especially problematic in Georgia because dying without a will converts the family home, land, or other property into heir property. A report by the Georgia Heir Property Law Center puts the scale of the problem in perspective. It's estimated that there is over $47 billion in probable heirs property in Georgia. Billion with a B. This is especially concerning because low-income families, people of color, and other marginalized groups are more likely to be the owners of heir properties, putting them in vulnerable positions. Heir properties make it much more difficult for families to generate wealth because every heir is responsible for paying taxes and other expenses and has the ability to transfer their estate to an outsider and must agree to key decisions about the property. Taken together, this means that owners of heir property are much more likely to face eviction or forced sale. Y'all, this is an issue that needs to be talked about more. Tangled titles limit the ability of people of color to pass wealth from generation to generation, putting the American dream even further out of reach. I'm working to create legislation with Ranking Member Cleaver to complement the Good Deed Act and to address the issues caused by heir property and tangled titles. And I hope the committee will give it the consideration that it deserves. Together, we can address these two critical issues that impact marginalized communities' ability to generate wealth. And that's the only way that we can truly begin to close the racial wealth gap, which unfortunately my district continues to lead the nation in. In closing, thank you, Chairman McHenry and Ranking Member Waters, for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I'm hopeful that this committee can begin to address the issues brought before you today. And I hope to find ways to work with both the chairman and the ranking member as we do this work on behalf of the people that we were sent here to represent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'll now recognize Mr. Sherman of California.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair McHenry and Ranking Member Waters, for this opportunity to testify. I want to draw your attention to several pieces of legislation that I've introduced or will introduce. All of them except one are already before you in legislative language form, and it's good to get a chance to get a hearing on these pieces of legislation. Quite a number of them deal with investments in China. Capital builds economies, and from a macroeconomic standpoint, we'd prefer that Americans not invest in China, but invest here. However, we have very substantial flows of capital from China, really into debt instruments issued by the United States and its companies. So this is not an attempt to prevent Americans from investing in China across the board, but to make that system fair and reasonable and provide adequate investor protection. The first bill is the China Risk Reporting Act, which requires that when companies register with the SEC, they discuss in their registration materials two things: the degree to which the company is dependent upon China, and second, the steps the company has taken to reduce its China risk. That second is so important because as American companies compete for capital, they should try to establish that they have the best record of working to de-risk their companies. If you de-risk our companies, you reduce risk for our entire economy. The second is the PRC, Military and Human Rights Capital Market Sanctions Act. We currently prohibit Americans from investing in certain Chinese companies involved in defense and intelligence. This expands that to cover those who have been designated by the United States as involving coerced labor and human rights violations. The next is the No China and Index Funds Act. There are such unique difficulties in evaluating a risk of investing in China that if the company is based in China, it should not be in a low-cost fund or an index fund. It should only be invested in by Americans who are looking very carefully at that company, not paint by the numbers. The next is the No Capital Gains Allowance for American Adversaries Act. As you know, we encourage Americans to invest in stock, not only by providing a capital gains allowance, but a step up in basis upon death. That's because we believe we want to encourage investment in American companies in the American economy. So why in the hell are we providing these incentives for investing in the Chinese economy or that of Russia, Belarus, or Iran? So this would treat as ordinary income and as an ordinary income asset any investment in companies based in China, Russia, Iran, or Belarus. Now, of course, that's mostly a Ways and Means bill, but it's only appropriate that investors fully understand the difference in taxation investing in a Chinese company versus one that is not in one of our adversaries. And that's why this bill also needs to be referred here to make sure that those investor disclosures are made. The next is the Sanctioning Iran's Special Drawing Rights Act, and this is one that says that the United States won't move forward with increasing special drawing rights until there is more accountability and transparency into how Iran uses its special drawing rights. The next is the Bank Safety Act. This requires that banks of over $100 million recognize unrealized losses on available for sale securities when they compute capital for bank regulatory purposes. Silicon Valley Bank didn't do this, and that's why we had to bail out the depositors of Silicon Valley Bank. The next is the Effective Bank Regulation Act, which requires that when we do stress testing, we stress test for increases and decreases in interest rates. Been here in this room a long time. Interest rates go up, interest rates go down. Banks, if they're going to show that they can handle a stress, should prove that they can handle both up and down. The second thing I should point out is that credit risk is most associated with loans to small business. Interest rate risk is most associated with billion-dollar bond purchases by banks. We now have a system that encourages banks to invest in the big bonds and discourages them from investing in small business. We ought to have a fair playing field as our small businesses compete with treasuries and with bonds issued by giant businesses when they seek bank capital. Thank you. I hope you have some questions.
Gentleman's time has expired. We thank the gentleman for his testimony. Thank lady from Georgia for her testimony as well. We're going to pause to accommodate our final member in her testimony. But if the panelists...
Well, let me take this opportunity to thank our members for showing up today and sharing with us what you're working on, what you care about. It certainly does give me an opportunity to know better how I can work with our members and how I can be helpful. So I appreciate you being here today and wish you a good weekend.
Thank you. And the panelists may be dismissed, and we'll pause to accommodate our final member. Committee will return to order, and we'll now recognize our final panelist of the day, our ultimate panelist of the day, the Honorable Rashida Tlaib of the state of Michigan. You're now recognized for 5 minutes. Recognize the microphones are terrible and the acoustics are terrible. Thanks so much, and you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to my colleagues for this opportunity to talk about the impact of a number of policies on my constituents. Today, I want to talk about 2 issues affecting our residents: medical debt as a factor in credit reports and auto insurance discrimination. Roughly 20%, Mr. Chair, of Americans have medical debt, and it's a tremendous amount of burden. In addition to regularly forcing families to exhaust their savings or cut back on food or clothing, such debt also prevents, and this is the key issue, our residents from meeting their basic needs by marrying their access to credit, meaning access to home ownership. A different number of issues, again, treating medical debt as if they purchased a car and not actually sought health services. I believe this is wrong. Undergoing, Mr. Chair, a medical procedure should never haunt someone financially. No one chooses to be sick. To make matters worse, medical debt has questionable predictive value. It is not necessary to use medical debt to predict a borrower's future credit risk. Furthermore, debt collectors often rely on inaccurate information, as many of our residents have told us, also pressuring those recovering from illnesses to pay bills they might not even owe. The issue also hits particularly hard in communities like mine, where residents already face challenges with access to credit and have long advocated on behalf of those saddled with medical debt. For instance, my Restoring Unfairly Impaired Credit and Protecting Consumers Act would prohibit outright the reporting of medical debt on consumer reports among those provisions to protect consumers. A medical emergency should not and need not send a family into financial ruin. I've seen it with my families who literally have a loved one with cancer and so forth, literally go bankrupt, preventing them, again, from truly being able to thrive in our country. I urge my colleagues to please join me in ensuring that no family has to face such difficulties by please supporting this bill and bringing it before this committee for consideration. The next issue I would like to now discuss is about auto insurance discrimination. Auto insurance is keeping my residents in a cycle of poverty. It's really important for folks to know marital status, credit score, all of those things should not be factors in whether or not somebody's a good driver. And right now, this has been impacting folks in order to take like a new job or go to school or deal with a medical emergency. One needs to access reliable transportation. And for many of my residents in my district, it's access to a car. Yet Michigan has one of the most expensive car insurance in the nation. So it is outrageous for me that my residents get asked whether or not they're married, what kind of education level they have, their credit score, all of it is really incredibly hurtful in being put towards the auto insurance rates. This summer, I know Michigan residents saw a 42% fee increase by the Consumer Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association, adding to high fees that are already unaffordable for many of our families. I know when I saw the University of Michigan report showing somebody with a DUI drinking under the influence, but he had a lower credit score compared to someone with a very, decent credit score, but not as high, but he had no DUI. The person that had the DUI, drinking under the influence, was paying 3 times higher in auto insurance rates than the person that did not have any violation. So we must stop using these non-driving factors in auto insurance rates. So again, I'm really grateful for my amazing partner in this is Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman. We have the Prohibit Auto Insurance Discrimination Act, which would prohibit the use of these proxies like education and zip codes to calculate insurance rates. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity to uplift my residents and some of the struggles that they have, and hopefully colleagues would work with me on Financial Services Committee on these issues.
Thank you. Thank you for testimony on important policy matters, and I thank you for making it here for Member Day, and you're the final testimony of the day. I'll yield to the ranking member.
Thank you very much. Ms. Tlaib, I want to thank you for your strong leadership in highlighting all the problems with medical debt. And I'd like to just get a little advice from you here. Of course, we know how it unfairly tarnishes so many consumers' credit scores the way the information gets reported by the major credit bureaus. There's no research that shows medical debt is a good indicator of individual's creditworthiness. If you get sick and need medical care, that should not affect your ability to take out a loan, renting an apartment, or even getting a job. But that's exactly what has happened, given the way our broken credit reporting system works. After working on this issue myself for more than a decade, I was pleased the National Credit Bureaus have taken steps to remove some medical debt information from consumers' credit reports. However, much more needs to be done, and I'm pleased that CFPB Director Chopra is taking further steps to address this issue. Mr. Lee, we have not held any hearings in our committee this year exploring this issue in any depth. Do you believe that the committee should hold a hearing with the CEOs of the National Credit Bureaus and experts on these issues, and then look to mark up your bill and others put forward by members of our committee to fix our broken credit reporting system? What do you think?
Yes, and Ranking Member, as you know, we did actually have the 3 largest credit reporting agencies before our committee, and many of us were able to ask some of the tough questions that many of my residents are asking, which is even, paid debt. I know the chair and I talked about medical debt and his personal experiences of something getting, paid, but it's still showing up on people's credit report. I think folks don't realize how incredibly important it is to fix credit reporting. It's literally the access to economic opportunities. So even if you're doing so well but you get sick, again, it gets on your credit report. It impacts literally whether or not you're able to thrive later, or whether or not you even can get a loan for a car. People are now looking at credit reports, Ranking Member, for employment. They're looking at it for, folks look to it as some sort of factor in whether or not that this person should be, getting a loan or for housing or whatever. But again, medical debt, to me, it's not like somebody's like, hey, I'm just going to go and rank up medical debt. They're sick. And sometimes it's actually, the majority of the time, when you hear folks talk about filing for bankruptcy in our country, a big, huge factor is medical debt. It's somebody in their family or themselves getting, very sick. And again, cancer is one that I hear consistently in my district. Folks that have to, pay an exorbitant amount of money because their insurance doesn't cover fully, because they're underinsured or not covered as much. It is the prescription drugs that continue to pile on my residents. And again, they may not have to pay the full amount, but all of it adds up, especially when it takes months and sometimes years to recover from a serious illness.
Thank you so very much. And your being here today certainly helps put more focus on the issue. And I certainly will work with the chairman to see what we can do in terms of the hearings that you're suggesting. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
and Mr. Chair and I,
Thank you.
yeah.
Gentlelady yields back. I'd like to thank our witnesses for their testimony today. We appreciate your insight, and we'll follow up if we have any questions, and this hearing is adjourned.